called freestyling. I'm gonna call an audible. You're here. You go next. Am I ruining anybody's PowerPoint day by doing that?
I don't know. Maybe mine.
Okay, let's see. What have we got?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Kill it.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Representative Erin Maye Quade. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight. I'm going to play you a little video. I don't like co-opting low-income families and their needs to push through an agenda for private schools. Low-income families do not need scholarships to private schools. They need their public schools to have funding and teachers and counselors and social workers and mental health providers and nurses and librarians. That's what low-income families need. You don't have to applaud for that speech. I didn't show you that speech because it was amazing, which it was, but I showed you that speech because it was. But I wanted you to see what I was talking about and what I was doing the first time that I was sexually harassed in the legislature. While I was giving that speech, did my PowerPoint disappear? While I was giving that speech, two of my colleagues were sitting behind me having a conversation. The first one leaned over and said, "Too bad she's a lesbian." And my colleague replied, "Yeah, what a waste. Look at that body." Later on during session, we were having a legislative reception. I was standing in a circle with some of my colleagues, and one of my male colleagues leaned in and said, "Hey, Maye Quade, you know what we have in common?" Without letting me respond, he said, "We both like to hot women." At the beginning of May, before session got really crazy, we were still sitting on the floor for a long period of time. I was coming back to the floor to sit in my seat. I had gotten a drink of water, and I got a text message from one of my colleagues, and it said, "I just got busted for looking at you on the floor. It's your own fault for looking too dang good. If I run for governor, I should be a little bit more gentlemanly." To which I replied, "You could already start now." I want to be very clear, that person is not running for governor. So I tell you these stories not to prove to you that I've been sexually harassed at the legislature or that harassment happens in the Capitol, because I don't think anybody in this room thinks that harassment doesn't happen to women in St. Paul. It happens to every woman in every profession every single day. But I tell you these stories because they're really important. While I was speaking on behalf of the 39,000 people that I represent about our schools, my colleagues weren't listening to my voice. They were looking at my body and objectifying me. While I was talking and networking with my legislative colleagues, they weren't thinking about what policies can we work on together, what values do we share. It was, "I'm thinking about you having sex with your wife." And in the last and final months of session, instead of listening to the debate and the amendments and the speaker, it was, "I'm looking at you and I'd like to tell you how I think about how you look and blame you for distracting me." I don't share these stories to prove it, but I share these stories tonight because I'm supposed to share with you my insights, my personal experiences, and what those mean for the Global Rights for Women's mission to end violence against women and girls around the world through the legal and systems reform. I work in that system. I work in that system, and my insights, I don't know what you're going to think about it. Democracy requires discipline, especially from elected officials. I have a reverence for my job. I love my job. I make the policies and the laws that the people of this state have to live by every single day. It's a very serious job. And yet my colleagues so easily reduced me to a body to talk about, objectify, comment on, or a lesbian whose marriage is worth fetishizing over. The government system is one of the most fundamental systems we must change. I work in that system, and yet I'm here to tell you that if the people who make our laws don't treat women as people, our laws won't treat women as people either. Cheryl Thomas said one of the most critical things that Global Rights for Women does is get laws passed, but if the attitudes about women from the people who pass our laws make women less than, that will show up in our public policy. I'm a gay, black, young woman. I am the definition of intersectional. And when I was elected and when I went to the legislature, I knew that I would have to do a lot of work. I would have to work harder and think more strategically and communicate better to make sure that none of my intersectional identities were ever diminished. And I've done that more than I even prepared to do. No, you don't have to clap for that because there is so much more. I believe that if I shared my stories, if I told my truth, if I talked to my colleagues and I told them about my life, they would believe me. That telling the truth would change hearts and minds. I'm an idealist and a realist both at the same time, and the idealist in me was so happy to learn that that was true for some people, that meeting me and knowing my life changed their hearts and minds. It changed conversations around committee tables. It changed conversations on the floors. But the hardest part is that there's some people that won't change. And they won't change because they don't think that they're wrong. They don't think that the way that they think is wrong. These men who said these things to me don't think that they're wrong. Violence against women and girls doesn't start with a punch or a bullet. It starts with this framework. It starts with this mindset that women are meant to be owned and controlled and viewed as an object for their pleasure. That's where it starts. So I wanted to come up here, idealist and realist, but as the legislator, as a freshman legislator, and tell you, guess what, guys? It's gonna be okay. There are enough people in the legislature doing the work and doing the job that it's gonna be okay. But the realist is standing here before you to tell you that it's not okay. To tell you that there are people who think that this is okay, that this is how you treat women, that the goodness and the whole personhood of woman stands next to their definition with men, as sisters and wives and daughters and aunties, not as people, but as in their relationship to men. And they'll tell you, because they're fathers and grandfathers and uncles and brothers, that they could never view women as less than, but they do. And so the realist in me is standing in front of you today to tell you that they're in the way, that the progress that we need to make to end violence against women and girls, a pandemic that affects 1 in 3 women worldwide, it starts with removing these barriers. These barriers are people who think of women less than even though they don't think they do. So I'm asking you tonight to join me to replace them. Donate to replace them, march to replace them, knock to replace them, run to replace them. We have so much work to do to change the framework through which we think about women. We don't have time to mess around with the fools who think like this. So I'm asking you to join me in changing the way we do things. And if the people in our systems don't change, change those people. Thank you so much.